didn't wake up with a plan. There was no sudden clarity, no list of changes, no decision to start over. What I realized was quieter than that. I realized I was still choosing, even after all the momentum, even after all the structure, even after becoming someone by default. Choice hadn't disappeared. I had just stopped noticing it. For a long time, I thought choice was something you exercised early in life, something you did when paths were open and outcomes were unclear. I believed that once you settled into a life that worked, choice gave way to maintenance. You picked a direction, and then your job was to keep going. That belief felt responsible. It felt realistic. It also felt final. I didn't see the small choices anymore. Not because they weren't there, but because they didn't feel important enough to count. I assumed that major decisions were behind me, that the rest was adjustment, optimization, stability. I didn't notice how often I was still choosing, just quietly, without calling it that, choosing to stay silent, choosing to go along, choosing not to question something because it felt inconvenient. Those didn't feel like choices. They felt like defaults. But defaults are still choices. They're just the ones you don't announce. I thought that realizing what I had given up would lead to urgency, that once I saw the exchanges, I would feel pressure to act. That didn't happen. What I felt instead was a strange sense of calm. Not relief, not motivation. Calm. Because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't telling myself that everything was already decided. I wasn't rushing to fix anything. I wasn't trying to reclaim a past version of myself. I was simply aware that my life was still responsive to attention. That realization changed how I moved through ordinary moments. I noticed how often I said yes automatically, how often I accepted expectations without checking my response, how often I chose what was easiest to maintain. I didn't correct those choices immediately. I just noticed them, and noticing changed their weight. I began to see that choice doesn't always arrive as a dramatic fork in the road. More often, it appears as a pause, a brief moment where you could continue as usual or do nothing at all. Those moments are easy to miss because they don't demand action. They don't insist. They pass quietly if you're not paying attention. I had been missing them for years, not because I was incapable, but because I was efficient. Efficiency had trained me to move quickly past hesitation, to smooth over uncertainty, to maintain flow. But flow can carry you far without ever asking where you're going. I realized that choice was still present in the way I responded to my own discomfort, whether I listened to it, whether I dismissed it, whether I allowed it to exist without immediately resolving it. I had treated discomfort as a problem to solve rather than information to notice. That approach worked well for external challenges. It didn't work as well internally. I began to understand that my life hadn't become rigid. My attention had. I had been focusing on what needed to be maintained, not on what needed to be felt. Once I saw that, something subtle shifted. Not in my circumstances, not in my schedule, in my orientation. I stopped assuming that the life I had built was the final version. I stopped telling myself that it was too late to reconsider how something felt. I didn't suddenly want something different. I simply allowed myself to ask whether what I was doing still made sense internally, not just externally. That question didn't come with answers. It came with awareness, and awareness doesn't rush. I noticed that when I paid attention, some choices became harder. Not because they were wrong, but because I could no longer pretend they were neutral. I could feel the difference between agreement and convenience, between alignment and habit. That awareness didn't force change. It offered honesty. I realized that I didn't need to overhaul my life to reclaim agency. Agency hadn't left, it had just become quiet. I had been exercising it unconsciously in the direction of least resistance. Now I could see it again. I could feel when I was choosing ease over truth, stability over presence, continuity over engagement. None of those were wrong, but none of them were automatic anymore. That was new. I understood that the most meaningful choices often don't change your life immediately. They change how you inhabit it. They change the tone of your days, the way you listen, the way you pause. They don't announce themselves as milestones. They show up as a slightly different relationship with your own experience. I didn't feel compelled to act quickly. In fact, I felt less rushed than before, because I no longer believed that time was closing. I had assumed that the window for choice had narrowed beyond usefulness. That assumption was false. The window hadn't closed. I had stopped looking at it. I realized that choosing doesn't always mean doing something new. Sometimes it means staying, but with awareness. Sometimes it means continuing, but without pretending it's inevitable. Sometimes it means acknowledging that you are still participating, even when nothing appears to be changing. That realization brought responsibility, but not pressure. It reminded me that I was not simply the result of past decisions. I was still in relationship with the present ones. I didn't feel empowered. I felt present, and presence is quieter than empowerment. It doesn't create urgency. It creates clarity. I became more attentive to how often I rushed past moments that deserved a pause. Not because they were important, but because they were honest. I didn't start choosing differently every time. I just stopped telling myself that I wasn't choosing at all. That distinction mattered. It restored a sense of authorship without requiring a rewrite. I didn't need to know where this awareness would lead. That felt unnecessary. It was enough to know that I was no longer moving blindly, that I could notice when something felt misaligned without immediately correcting it, that I could sit with uncertainty without interpreting it as failure. I realized that the second half of life isn't defined by big decisions. It's defined by attention, by whether you're still willing to notice what's happening internally as life continues externally. I hadn't missed my chance. I had missed my awareness. And awareness, once regained, doesn't demand speed. It asks for honesty. I didn't suddenly know what I wanted, but I knew something important. I was still choosing, even now, especially now. And this time, I was paying attention.